my name is Grace Callahan, and today I will be presenting on the Asian liberation praxis. Let me first start off by acknowledging that there is not one correct definition of Asian liberation praxis. We will each have our own unique definitions. So breaking it down into basic terms, praxis means theory put into practice, while Asian liberation, in my eyes at least, is made up of many components, but in the most generalized terms is freedom from racism and systematic oppression. Therefore, my definition of Asian liberation praxis is the beliefs of equity and equality put into action, including the freedom from systematic oppression. From Haijim Shim and Eddie Zhang's presentation, we had the opportunity to hear their definitions of Asian liberation. Shim says, when people talk about liberation, what traditions or ways are they talking about? And if liberation and decolonization conditions would be livable for LGBTQ members? When we don't protect or include certain members of our community, what violence does that expose them to? What she's saying is that Asian communities need to be working towards accepting all of their members, as well as seeking liberation for all. If only some Asians can be liberated, then those who are not will face oppression to an even stronger degree. When people are fighting for decolonization, they need to be accounting for the previous Asian cultures that were not accepting of LGBTQ members. We need to be mindful that when we seek liberation and decolonization, there is no past culture that was perfect. Many changes need to be made to incorporate new beliefs. Zhang's view was that personal revelation is tied to that praxis. If we get too fixated on the systems of racism, we can lose sight of who the oppressor is. We must seek change for every minority in order to humanize all. So he's essentially saying that liberation looks like unity between minorities. The vision of liberation must seek to destroy systems of advantage for all indefinitely. Similarly, in the book, The Asian American Movement, Yen Li shares the same view, reminding us of the Pan-Asian movement of the 1960s. She writes, originally imposed by non-Asians, it became a symbol of pride and a rallying point for mass mobilization by later generations. The Pan-Asian movement unified differing Asian origins. It created a stronger power that could oppose racism. Eddie Zhang shares this very similar point of view and recommends that we continue this movement in today's culture. So let's break down what racial justice is for Asians. First off, what does it look like? In my eyes, it's equal opportunities as well as demolition of systems of advantage based on disadvantage. Taking this into consideration, Shim also mentioned how Asians specifically are targeted for criminalization. She mentioned that in courts, language access is not even thought of. And when it is, the court interpreters, they have the ability to completely change and, make their own whatever the person is speaking. They have complete control. As well as, it's not who's afraid to call the police. It's also who's afraid to have the police called on them. With past criminal records, safety isn't as accessible as it is to those with privilege. And she also mentioned criminalized labor, how sex workers are shamed so heavily in the United States, and there's no real reason for it. If sex work was legalized, crimes around sex work could drop dramatically. Looking from a socio-historical perspective, Yuri Kochiyama mentions in the journal Blacks, Latinos, and Asians in Urban America, Status and Prospects for Politics and Activism, which was published by James Jennings, that the Asian American liberation movement in the 60s, it found so much success due to the grassroots organizing, which is essentially focusing on what the base of these systems are and how communities can receive immediate relief. That idea is still prevalent in today's advocacy, as many philanthropies, outreach programs, and advocacy groups are constantly being created. Shim is an excellent example of this, as she has many advocacy groups, as well as Eddie Zhang. But she also noted that, with giving advice to how to create stronger advocacy groups, she said, it's important to expand our numbers and grow, but it only takes a small number of people to change someone's life. So she's basically reminding us that everyone is possible of change. You shouldn't be discouraged by how small your group is. So let's discuss the hashtag Stop Asian Hate. Shim's opinion on the hashtag Stop Asian Hate was that it's a starting point for people, but it's not her favorite because it fails to account for all aspects sought through racial justice. Eddie said the danger in it is when all attacks on Asian Americans are labeled as hate crimes. It perpetuates white supremacy. So essentially, racism is a very complex problem, and a hashtag is obviously not going to be the solution to it, because racism cannot be simplified to hate. Yes, hate is a part of racism, but it's not the main component, because racism doesn't care about emotions and feelings. So, limiting racism to hate doesn't make much sense, because all racism cares about is the advantage and the disadvantage it can cause. And then here are my citations. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.